Welcome to the conversation. I'm Paul Grondahl, Director of the New York State Writers Institute at the University of Albany. We're excited today to have Stephen Kiernan. He'll be talking about his new novel, Universe of Two. But before we begin, I'd remind you that you can watch all these conversations on the Writers Institute YouTube channel. You can also go to our website, noiswritersinstitute.org. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and also our upcoming third annual Albany Book Festival, September 10th through 24th, is all virtual this year. You can find all that also at nyswritersinstitute.org. So we're very happy to have Stephen Kiernan today. Welcome, Stephen.
Glad to be with you.
So your new novel, Universe of Two, is just coming out, first of all, during a pandemic, which is difficult. But there's a historical connection that's really important because it's at the heart of your novel. This is the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, one of the most worst atrocities in human history. And your novel centers around that, the people at the Los Alamos project, Manhattan Project, building the atomic bomb. Talk about what was the genesis for this novel, because there's a real character behind your fictional character. Talk about how you decided to write this novel.
This started with the fact that I've always been kind of an omnivore when it comes to reading. And one of the things, I think I'm a rarity in that I still read literary magazines, you know, the quarterlies that come out. And one that I have loved for a long time is the Georgia Review. And there was an essay in there about pacifists and how there really aren't pacifists anymore, not so much. And we're kind of perpetually at war as a nation, that kind of thing. And toward the end of it, it mentioned this guy, Charles Fisk. And he was, I think, kind of a math genius, graduated from Harvard at a very young age, prematurely. And instead of being drafted in the Army, he was inducted into what was essentially a wing of the Manhattan Project. And he ended up building components of the detonator of the atomic bomb. And after the war, he was given a full ride to Stanford to get a PhD in physics. And he lasted about half a semester because all they were talking about there was building bigger bombs. And he quit, and he did some very interesting things with the rest of his life. And I thought, wow, this guy's, you know, is just 2 pages in this long essay, but he was fascinating to me. And so I started to do homework on him, not necessarily thinking I'd write a novel about it. I was working on a different project at the time. And as I started to learn about the making of the atomic bomb, I found out, well, a lot of things, but one of them that a lot of the scientists working on the bomb didn't want to be there and didn't want the bomb built and certainly didn't want it used on people. And I thought, oh, I have a story here. There's a great meaty untold story here, because I'd never known that before. So I put aside the actual person of Charles Fisk. I had researched his life by that time. I'd gone to the factory of a company that he founded. I had interviewed his daughter. I'd interviewed somebody who was writing his biography. And I said, I don't want to write his story. I want to write a fictional story. I want to write a novel about someone like him. So I created Charlie Fish. And I had him fall in love with Brenda Doobie, who is a kind of sassy Chicago girl who plays the piano and the organ and works in the family organ store in Chicago. And in some ways they are a mismatch because he's quiet and polite and a choir boy, and she's sassy and brassy and full of opinions. And yet there's a way that they are very suited to one another. And eventually Charlie figures out what he's doing in the math and other work that he's doing for the government. He realizes he's helping to build this devastating weapon, and he has immense moral misgivings. So he is in some ways like a personification of what I found all those scientists had felt. And so he hesitates to do his job. And Brenda's not allowed to know what he's working on, but that's not going to hold her back. And she says, you know, soldier up. You know, my brother's in Europe. My best friend's husband's about to be part of the invasion of the Japanese mainland, where, you know, maybe 1 million people will die. Like, be a man, make this thing. And so he does. And of course, after the war, he has an enormous weight on his conscience for not kind of obeying his inner compass. And Brenda also feels culpable. And so together, kind of with their love to bind them, they go out seeking redemption, and they find it. Right. And how they do that is, you know, it makes it, at the end of the day, it is a war story, but it is fundamentally a love story. And 2 youngsters who are in over their heads in kind of a momentous time in human history.
Right. I mean, that's what your novel brings out, and you remind us these are young people. I mean, the real Charles Fisk, right, was in his 20s, and most of them were in their 20s. The old man, Oppenheimer, was only in his late 30s, I think.
Right.
Um, so they've got all this life ahead of them, and yet the signal event of their life was the most destructive bomb in human history. So how do you create a love story out of such destruction and such moral quandary? I know you use alternating chapters, they're two very different kind of characters, but how did you get those two perspectives into kind of a historical novel, during World War II, and then you wrap a love story around it? Was that a challenge, novelistically?
It was more like if you're driving a truck and the back is loaded with nitroglycerin. You want to move very carefully because things are very large. There are huge concepts in this. There's passionate debate about whether the bomb was a good idea or a bad idea, all that sort of thing. And I didn't want to write a polemic. I wanted to write a novel, which it's not necessarily a political document. It is a story first. So yes, there's two narrative voices. And one of them, I say, is the voice that has a security clearance. It's inside the Manhattan Project. It follows Charlie around. It witnesses the testing of an atomic bomb in the desert of New Mexico. And the other one does not have a security clearance and is more like us. And that's Brenda's story and her sort of half knowing what's going on. It's interesting, for example, Paul, in all of history, the year in which worldwide spending on nuclear weapons was highest was 2019. In all of history. And we have no idea, no sense of that going on. And so we are Brenda. We don't have a security clearance. We just think like, well, go protect us, people, do the right job. And there's a way that we entrust people, and there's a way in which we don't think about it too much. And that's sort of her. So if Charlie's being asked to do something for the war, it must be good. And so there's a lot of innocence in them. And then what happens is gradually Charlie begins to realize it's almost like playtime until one day when he realizes he's sitting in a lecture and he realizes that he has a very small part of this giant device, but it's an essential one. He says at one point, it's like they're building a school bus and he's making the steering wheel. And so, right. And so he feels like, he's lighting the match, literally. And what that means, that he is an instrument of the greatest destruction in history.
So you're also kind of starting from scratch. Like you said, you didn't know the details of this. You've got to learn a lot about physics, a lot of science, a lot of history, but you're also a journalist and a former journalist who's worked for newspapers and journals. So talk about your process. You did a lot of research. How did you go about the research?
It was a fun process. It was a mind-blowing process because I don't know physics or chemistry or anything like that. And I didn't want to fill the book with physics or chemistry, but I felt like I needed to know it so that I could write, verisimilitude, that the reader would believe the story. So I started by reading a bunch of books. The Making the Atomic Bomb by Richard Rhodes is kind of the Bible of this. There's also the Atomic Heritage Foundation put together a collection, almost like an oral history and writings called the Manhattan Project, and that was sort of an insider piece. I went to Los Alamos and climbed all over the place. Because there's a musical component of it, I also went to a bunch of places that had organs and church organs, and stood inside the guts of some of the most amazing organs on earth, which was really fun. But here's the thing, research for a novel is very different from research for newspapers. I wasn't so concerned with names and dates and numbers. It was more about the human component of it. So I'll give you two examples. One is that when they tested the atomic bomb, they did one test in New Mexico. They put it on a tower about 100 feet off the ground. And when the thing blew up, the detonation was so intense and hot that the steel tower vaporized, and the sand on the ground for about 500 yards around was turned into glass. It's a way that just sort of helps me. I don't need to know number of degrees. I just know that it turned the ground into glass. The other thing is that at Los Alamos, they had, the largest collection of Nobel Prize winners in the sciences in one place ever in human history.
Right.
And more PhDs than any university now and today. And yet the milk was always sour. like all these geniuses, but they couldn't figure out refrigeration in the New Mexico desert.
Right.
And it made it so human for me, you know? And so that's the stuff that so I read, you know, thousands of pages. And there is some film evidence from the Manhattan Project and from the Trinity test. But what I was really looking for was the human part of it, that the reader would get. Every reader knows the experience of sour milk and how you just recoil.
Right.
So you see what I mean? So it's a different kind of research.
More texture than facts and blocks of information. But tell the story. So do you kind of trespass at Los Alamos? Is it actually open to the public? Because they stop you at the airport. Tell that story.
Well, you know, it's an interesting place. You know, if you go to Pearl Harbor, you can stand in that white memorial building and look out the window, and right there is the USS Arizona sitting in the water. You go to Gettysburg, and you can get a pamphlet. You know, 1,200 boys died on this hill. You know, during Pickett's charge. You go to Normandy, and not only are the cemeteries there, you know, the pillboxes are still there, and there's rusting iron in the water. You go to Los Alamos, and it is scrubbed. It is absolutely scrubbed. There is a museum of kind of atomic energy and weaponry, but it's really sanitized, and otherwise. So here's what happened. You know, I knew that Charlie, the real Charles, had lived in a barracks, as the young men did. They were packed into these just makeshift barracks. So I was trying to find out where they were. I had brought with me on my trip a bunch of books. One of them was, was The Making the Atomic Bomb and so on. And then I had a bunch of kind of self-published memoirs by the wives of the scientists. And they had some very crude maps. And I'm walking around, and the security folks don't like a guy walking. I mean, I'm in broad daylight, public streets, neighborhoods of Los Alamos, city of 10,000 people. And I'm walking around, and security guys are like, can I see some ID? It was just a lot of, can I see? So I actually started carrying my driver's license in my pants pocket, so I wouldn't have to keep taking out my wallet for it. Well, so one of the books that I had with me was called, now the name has escaped me, which is terrible. Radio Free Vermont. And it was the new book by Bill McKibben, which I knew I'd been told by the bookstore owner who gave it to me that it was a farce and a lark and kind of revolutionary and fun. So at any rate, I finished my research, and then it's time to fly home out of Albuquerque. And I get to the airport, it's an early morning flight, and clearly I have been flagged. And I've never had experience like this before. They'd had me step outside of a line and put my feet where there were marks on the floor, and had a guard come and stand next to me. They took my suitcase and completely emptied it, literally unscrewing the toothpaste and sniffing it. They opened my computer and turned it on. It was like I've never been searched more thoroughly. I thought, this is very interesting. At one point I stepped forward because my belt was caught in the conveyor belt, and the guard was like, no, sir, you'll stay right here. So they had to stop the conveyor belt and get anyway. But in the course of this, one of the guys, I think he was like the main officer or whatever, the commander of that unit, was looking through my books. And the first book is like How to Build a Bomb. You know, it's like Bombing Made Easy, like just not books you want to have with you in an airport when you're being searched. And he's literally flipping through the pages to make sure they're really books. It's like that level of scrutiny. And then the last thing he comes to is Bill McKibben's book, which I had saved for the flight home. I don't know one thing about it except that it's revolutionary and a farce, right? And this guy, and I'm thinking, please don't get me arrested, whatever's in that book. And Bill's a friend of mine, and I'm thinking, like, there's going to be a story for him, you know, at the end of this, and it better not be like written from a jail cell. And the guy just is flipping through it, and unlike the other ones, he gets to the first page, and he's just looking at it and looking at it, and then he turns the page, and I realize he's reading it. And now, like, other people are backed up, the line is getting long, you know, and you know, and my stuff is all, you know, my running clothes that are still soggy from the day before. I mean, everything, it's all out there. And he turns the page again, and I say, can I go now? And he looks over and says, oh yeah, he's fine. So now I'm packing everything up, and, you know, it's a mess, and I'm just stuffing it in, just trying to get it zip closed and all that stuff. And when everything is put away, I come over, and the guy's like on page 8. I'm like, you know, I'm sorry to bother you, you know, but that's my book for the trip home. And he goes, oh no, it's kind of funny. It's a good book. And he hands it to me. And so my message to Bill is that the TSA of Albuquerque approves of your novel.
That's a perfect blurb.
you know, having been a newspaper guy, and you know this from your own experience, usually when somebody says you can't have any information, that becomes a motivator.
Right.
There are actually federally salaried historians at Los Alamos whose
Mm.
job is to tell the history of this place, and they were beyond worthless.
Yeah.
They confirmed for me that the guy I was interested in had been there. They wouldn't tell me what team. They wouldn't tell me where he was. They wouldn't tell me when he was. It was, you know, and the reporter in me wanted to just like, okay, I'm going to find out everything, but I didn't need to. What I needed to see was, you know, where they've done their test bombing,
Right.
where you know, it's very near Bandelier National Monument, what the drive up was like, what the air was smelled like, um, so that I could write a vivid place.
Right. But what are they protecting or hiding at this point? Because I saw you did an interview with, I think it was the Burlington Free Press. You said you could build an atomic bomb in your garage now, and people bent on that probably could. I mean, as you say, there's books out, bomb making for dummies and such. So what are they protecting, do you think?
Well, I could make one in my garage theoretically, but the components are very expensive. I think, you know, the plutonium alone would cost about $300 million. But there is still now a national laboratory in Los Alamos that is where our nuclear weapons are designed and devised,
Mm.
and there is so much security there that there's actually a bridge with it's literally like the interstate toll booth for people to come up and show identification to get in and out to do their business. It looks like a very nice office park. Corporate Woods. It looks like Corporate Woods, except there are no logos on the buildings. It's just the national lab, and there's a camera absolutely
Of
everywhere.
course. That's why they stopped you at the airport. They were tracking you, I'm sure, the whole time you were walking around
I
taking notes and
imagine.
everything.
And I think what a waste of time on their part, because most of my life is sitting right here at this desk day after day. It's not exciting in the least to them, you know?
Um, what's the town like? Or is the town, do they try to sell like kitschy souvenirs? Are they respectful are they doing
I
anything with
think
the anniversary, for instance? Are they acknowledging the anniversary of the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
there were, I guess it's a great question. The atmosphere of the town is that it's more like a town of scientists and engineers. And in fact, there was a geologist there who I ended up getting the information that I needed from, and he was very helpful. And I had much more that I think they call it like the city of invention or something like that. Is when you come into town, it's much more of a chamber of commerce sort of approach of it. And there is a tiny bit of tourism there. Again, here's an example. Detail that's an example. The center of the campus was a boys' school for about 50 years, I think, before the government acquired it. And this boys' school, kind of rough and ready, horseback kind of school. And their central building was called Fuller Lodge, big pine, 2 stories tall, kind of handsome wooden structure. And so that was what was there until the 1940s. Then Los Alamos, as the Manhattan Project headquarters began, the school was gone. And so you go there today, and the building's in perfect shape. There's a sign above the door that says, National Register of Historic Places. And you go inside, and there are pictures on the wall, and they are all like class of 1931 at graduation.
Yeah.
Here's some boys in the 1920s playing basketball. They're all pictures of the school. Like, that's all this has ever been, just a school, There's a kind of, and what I think is actually, there's an ambivalence there that has not been addressed.
Right.
Just as I believe that there is a cultural ambivalence in America that has not been addressed, that to me was a very appealing kind of vein to be mining when I was writing the novel. This book is not, there are characters who think the bomb is a great thing. There are characters who think it is mass murder.
Yeah, that's what I would like you to, and kind of put you on the moral hot seat. How do you come down? Obviously, it's kind of generational. Our parents who grew up, during World War II may have seen it differently. It ended the war. We lost a lot of, we ended a horrible Holocaust in a way. But how do
Yes.
you come down? Obviously, there's still people marching against, atomic and nuclear weapons today.
Yeah.
How did you come down, or did you as a novelist?
I think about, I should say first that there were a great many protests that were planned and assemblies that were licensed to happen this summer because of the 75th anniversary of the bomb, and COVID just stopped all of that. And but I think that we have a reality now. I can't second guess a decision because I wasn't living in the culture at that time. My father served in the South Pacific. You know, he had a bad back. He had sliced off a chunk of his ear and he lost half of his teeth, and that he was considered lucky. You know, and I think my mother lost a brother in the European theater. You know, I can't imagine what that would be like. My siblings are so precious to me. I can't imagine it. So here's what I know. You can tell I'm still struggling with this. I wrote a whole book and I still don't know exactly. Okay.
That's the thing about being a novelist. You can leave gray areas, and I'm just kind of asking it as a personal.
As a person,
Yeah.
you know, as long as humans have made war, which is really as long as there have been humans, whenever we've had a new weapon, we've used it. Trebuchet, gunpowder, airplane, whatever. But the target has always been the enemy army. Now, you can argue about the morality of that, but we're looking at an armed combatant who will kill us. In this case, you got 6,000 nerds on a mountain in no danger, devising a weapon that is indiscriminate. It's so powerful, it doesn't just kill the soldier, it kills the 2-year-old. It doesn't just kill, you know, the sailor, it kills the monk. And this is the moral line that is crossed. Does it matter? Is it different to kill somebody who's holding a weapon than to kill a child? Boy, I'm not ethically like trained in discernment like that. What I know is it all makes me very, very, very uncomfortable. And it made these characters very, very uncomfortable. And they did it anyway because of the imperatives of the war. So here we are now. These things are in the world. And we think of it in a binary way. It's us or Russia. It's us or Russia. But it is completely plausible that Iran and Israel would have an exchange of nuclear fire, North and South Korea. Right now, India and Pakistan are fighting over the Kashmir region. And, you know, so the end of the world could come from nukes, and we wouldn't even be a party to it. We'd just be the victims of it. Kind of ironic, right? So these things are in the world, and we have to reckon with them. And that is a lot about treaty and negotiation and working toward, you know, Hiroshima and Nagasaki have proved to be visual aids. They have proved to be very powerful deterrents for 75 years.
Right.
I guess one more thing, you know, there was a guy named Joseph Rotblat who was a senior physicist. And when Germany surrendered, Japan didn't really have a bomb program, so they just wanted to continue it in case the Russians came up with it. And he resigned. And he was treated like a spy and investigated. He just resigned. And then he founded something called the Pugwash Conferences, and they were the convener of all of the early treaties about ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles,
Right.
about nuke tests, about nuke war, how many warheads people would have, things like that. And he ended up winning the Nobel Peace Prize, right? This is a guy who took his own misgivings as part of the Manhattan Project and sought redemption. And, you know, we are capable of redemption. And certainly Charlie and Brenda, they are capable of redemption. And how they do it can even be a template for how we find it. Boy, I dodged your question.
No, that's
because
okay.
I don't really know.
But let's see. I mean, you've got the destructive side, but the creative side is the real life character, Mr. Fisk, who has an organ, and they create some of the great organs in this country and beyond. And you've got an example at the University of Vermont, I believe, of a Fisk organ. Talk about how he, you know, segued from, you know, mathematician, scientist, helping to develop atomic bomb to organ manufacturing.
So the actual Charles Fisk was, you know, as I say, was a doctoral student at Stanford, and he dropped out and he took a job in Redwood City with a company that repairs organs. He went back to Stanford and studied a little bit of music there. Did not get a master's, though he was working on it, and then ended up with his wife traveling around the world, seeing and playing and looking at the guts of great organs. And then he came back to Gloucester, Mass, where he hired men that were former shipbuilders because they were great artisans and craftsmen. And he created the C.B. Fisk company that makes, yes, some of the greatest organs in human history. Some say the greatest organ on earth is in a 14th century cathedral in Lausanne, Switzerland, that has a Fisk organ in it, made in the 1970s.
Right.
I had the pleasure of hearing a bunch of Fisk organs. I think one of my favorite research experiences, just as an aside, was at Harvard. There's a Fisk organ there, and I did tour the Fisk factory, and the next day I was at Harvard, and they have a morning prayer service that they've had every day since Harvard has existed. And there's a choir, and there's organ playing. And afterward, I met with the organ director there, that was arranged. And I said, wow, that organ sound great. And he said, oh yeah, but it's really only good for the French literature. You need to hear the Fisk. I thought I was hearing the Fisk, right? And he waited till everyone cleared out, and then he gave me a performance, a concert for one. And he played this magnificent instrument while I sat in different places in this empty chapel, hearing, one of the transcendent. It would be like a solo Stradivarius concert there. It was, and I know nothing about organs, and you could tell. It was so great.
But you're a musician, right? Did this aspect of the story also appeal to you? Tell me about your own musical background.
Yes, it was enormously fun to have Brenda be a musician. I play stringed instruments, and she's a keyboard player, and I just can chord on keys. That's all. But it meant that there's a vocabulary of music all the way through it, and I actually. I think it works when you read it, but if people slow down, like when she goes to demonstrate the organ, she plays cheek to cheek, like she's sort of, this kind of, and Charlie wants her to play slow songs because she's beautiful when she plays slow songs and doesn't know that she's beautiful. So he's like, how about Chopin, and I picked very specific pieces of music. I describe them so the reader doesn't need to know them. But if somebody went and listened to a recording of it, that they would get so much richer. And there's one moment when she's missing him, when he's in New Mexico and she's in Chicago. And I actually composed something, and it was just the beat. It was just a little improvisation in B flat and to the G minor, and going back and forth between those two chords while she plays a D, which is a note that's common to those two chords. And I don't imagine a single reader actually went to a keyboard and tried that. But if you did, you'd find out, wow, this is sad. So yeah. I had a lot of fun with that. And, there is a difficult piece that Brenda spends the entire novel trying to learn. And that turns out to be, because it's a process, to a novelist, that's like a gold mine, right? There's so much growth that can happen in her.
Right.
And not in her musicality, in her humanity. And I didn't know that when I started it, that her progress musically could symbolize her progress as a human being, right, and her arc as a character. And so that was great fun.
So Universe of Two, it's your fourth published novel, I believe. You also done 2 nonfiction books. It seems to be the most complex, most challenging. And here you are in a pandemic. It would be great to be doing book festivals like our Albany Book Festival. You were part of it last year. We can't do that in person this year. Bookstores are very limited. How are you working on releasing this book and getting it out there and talking about it?
As you can probably tell, Paul, as we're chatting here, I'm a voluble guy. I love people. Right. And writing a book requires, oceans of solitude, thousands of hours. And this book was enormously difficult because of the things I needed to learn, and because of its complexity, and because I felt like I was reaching. As an artist, I felt like I was really reaching and trying for something bigger. And so it took me twice as long as the book before, longer than any other book I've ever written. And so I was really looking forward to the people connection part of it. I call it the tunnel of 1,000 hugs. Your book comes out and you just give love and receive love from readers and bookstores and festival attendees. And I did enjoy New York State Festival last year a lot. Great group of people, those kinds of experiences. And that just was not to be. And so here's the thing. The best Zoom talk in the world, if you say something hilarious, you do not hear laughter.
Right.
You see muted people maybe laughing. I did one where I said something really naughty, and a whole bunch of people wrote LOL, LOL in the chat. It's like, that's very nice of them, but human, so I'm sad about it.
Yeah.
At the same time, there's a group called the Mighty Blaze on Facebook that's been doing a fantastic job of connecting readers and writers. And I was fortunate enough to do a couple of chats with them. I've done, I don't know, probably 30 Zooms. And so there's definitely been human connection, not the same, but on the scale of sufferings that's occurring during a pandemic, it's very small. It's my little world. I will tell you, I'm working on another novel that's going to be out in the winter of 22, and I'm going on tour if I have to do it in snowshoes. I miss the people. I do.
Right. So you live in Vermont, and I know you're the father of 2 sons. How has the pandemic affected you and your family? How have you quarantined, and how have you stayed safe and healthy?
Yeah. My sons are in their 20s. They were roommates in the East Village. And there was a point where it was starting to get scary in mid-March. And so they decided to come home for 2 weeks. And Will was here for 3 months. And then he went back to New York. And by then, things were under control there. And Noah is still here, 5 months and counting. And he's being very patient with his old man. He was kind enough to make me breakfast today, but I needed more coffee first. And I got in his way, and he was a good guy about it. And he was right. He was a good guy. Right. I really feel for my sons because so much of their lives is on hold right now. I'm really glad they were both out of school, because if they were 1 year younger, one of them would have still been in college. And I think to be robbed of the culmination of your college and education experience, to be robbed of college graduation is really unfortunate.
What kind of work do each of them do?
Right now they both are working remotely. Will works for a consulting firm called Alvarez & Marsal that really works with companies in crisis, and he's in their healthcare division, so he's very busy right now. And Noah works for Chubb Insurance in their cyber division. And so
are they early readers for you at all, or do they? Who do you show early drafts or work?
It turns out, and I didn't really know this, but it turns out that if your dad is a novelist, reading his stuff can be kind of weird.
And I agree. My kids don't read my books either usually. I
know. So Will does read my stuff, and Noah has read some stuff. He started this one, and he put it aside. He said he'd get back to it. I have a couple of people that I really trust. For example, often my novels have female narrators or very central female characters. And so I have 2 women that I turn to right out of the gate, even when it's very raw, when it's not polished draft and it's just finished first draft, to say, like, tell me where I am, stepping on my own foot here. And they don't hesitate, and they've taught me a lot. And then I have a couple of other people, and it depends on the book. And for some books, I've had 7, 8 advanced readers, but for this one, I had 3, just 3. And then my agent Elle Levine, who I really trust, and my editor Jennifer Burrell, who I completely trust. Again, kind of strong women that will not kind of, they are strong women that will help me stay on the straight and narrow. Invariably, Ellen's ideas make the book shorter, which to my mind is better. And invariably, Jen catches me when I tend to overstate things, and she makes me dial back and be more subtle, or suggest rather than say explicitly. And so now I've done 4 books with that team of people, that's over 8 years, 9 years. Like, we are friends.
That's great.
We know about each other's lives, and because I worked in newspapers for a long time, I know the value of an editor.
Yes.
And because I was an editor for a while, right?
Yes. What papers did you work at? I don't really know your journalism background too much.
So I started out at the Daily Iowan in Iowa City, Iowa, the DI, and then I spent 15 years and change at the Burlington Free Press here in Vermont. Okay. Yeah. And then since then, I've done a bunch of writing for the Boston Globe, and I had something a couple weeks ago, and then 10 days ago in USA Today. I still do that because I love doing it, and the industry has much changed.
And you were also Iowa Writers Workshop, I know. Yeah. Who were your mentors, heroes, or people that you when you were there? Or?
Here's how I would describe it. If you think about 4 14-week semesters, that adds up to about a year. And so in a writing life, as more years pass, Iowa becomes, it assumes its appropriate proportion. But in the time that I was there, it was 100% of my writing life.
Right.
I had written a couple of novels that were terrible and unpublishable, and it was like if I was going to move forward, I needed to immerse. And so you know, Frank Conroy was the head of the program there,
Yeah.
and he was a guy. He was very interesting because he wrote really slowly and not a lot of books. A couple of great ones, um, but I liked how he really felt that language was like a covenant. It was a contract between reader and writer, and the writer needed to be very careful with his language to say exactly what he meant and to know exactly what he was saying, and that there was a responsibility there. I thought that was great. Um, you know, I worked with Francine Prose, who was
Right.
just so sharp, you know, and has kind of a biting intellect that was very interesting to me. You know, I'm not ironic. I'm sincere, and so to work closely with somebody who's, you know, who will take a sincere thing and say, well, that's banal. You know, it's just like it, you know, it made me.
Right.
But the real asset for me from Iowa, aside from enormous amounts of time to read and write, was my classmates, and many of them have turned out to be really terrific writers. And you know, I think if you look in horror sci-fi, Justin Cronin is as good a practitioner as you're going to find. For regionalism of the South and Appalachia, I think Chris Offutt, first rate.
Yeah.
You know, John Marks wrote a couple of great war books. Deborah Immergut has written some, you know, has got her You Again is her new book about middle age. You know, Tom Barbash is writing about kind of urban middle, like these are all my classmates. You know, Elizabeth McCracken, she's written fantastic.
Right.
These are the people that I was like having a beer with and debating W.S. Merwin. You know, it was just, it was, and some of those relationships have kept, some have moved on, but that was gold. I was writing while I was working in business. I get up in the morning and write before going to work in a suit. And
Right.
you can't serve two masters. I
Right.
tried,
Yeah.
and what happened is that my best friend died, and I was 27, and I realized I didn't have forever to dream of being a writer. I better go do it. And so Iowa was a great place to make that transition and to really leap in with both feet.
So we're at the University at Albany and we're based in Albany. I want to talk about your family's connection. Your father was a prominent businessman,
He
civic
was.
leader, philanthropist, Peter Kiernan. There's a plaza named for him across from he was the chairman, CEO of North Star Bank Corp. I interviewed him a couple times, if I remember. And
How was he to interview? What was he like?
I don't know. It's probably, you know, it was 100 years ago. And I think he was, I don't know, it wasn't like a human interest or feature story. It was probably some, you know, business related thing. So
Right.
I don't have a strong opinion. It was probably a pro forma. I was a young reporter. But I know you come from a big family and talk about, I think you went to Albany Academy too, right? What did
I
you
did
take?
not. No, my sister went to Albany Academy.
Oh, okay.
I went to St. Gregory's, but then I have to tell you, there's a way in which the New York State Writers Institute, I think in its very infancy, had a hand in the direction of my life, and it's kind of a funny story.
Yeah.
So you know, so my father was a very successful businessman, philanthropist, and he was a real straight arrow guy, and lot that I respect about him. And he had no truck whatsoever with my idea to be a writer. He thought that was damn foolishness, and he told me so in those words 15 or 20,000 times. And yet there was a point where I said, you know, I think I'm going to leave this job. I got into Iowa, and I think I'm going to go to the writers' workshop. And he was just he was like, don't quit that job. It's a good job, you know. And he was just saying, wait and see. And you know, there were a lot of other factors, but at any rate, then the New York State Writers Institute had an event. I think it was like a Lifetime Achievement Award for Grace Paley. It was
Yes.
something like that.
She won the New York State Authors Award. We give out a New York State author, New York State poet. I covered that for the Times Union when I worked there. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know why my father would have been at that luncheon. I don't know why. I can't imagine why. Maybe his company had given some money. I don't know, but there he was, and he found himself in conversation with William Kennedy, who he had known when they both attended Albany Academy.
Right.
And they're just making chat. And my father said to him, look, I need your help with something. I can't sort it out. One of my sons has got the writing bug, and I can't deter him. I can't steer him away from it. And Bill Kennedy said, well, what's he doing now? And he said, My father said, "Oh, he wants to go off to some damn foolishness place in Iowa." And Bill said, "Oh, well, actually, that's probably the best writing school. Good for him. He's going to be fine." And my father went back to his office after lunch and he called me. And you need to understand the number of times my father called me in my life was one, maybe two. And the second time was to chew me out last night. And he called me and he told me about that conversation. And it was as close as he could come to giving me his blessing. And so for making this leap. And so last year when I came down to your book festival and I saw William Kennedy, I went right to him and I said, "I got to bend your ear for a minute. You need to hear this story. You have no idea what a favor you did for me." So, it was a terrific place to grow up. We were out in Loudonville, which is, a pretty privileged area. And we spent a chunk of the summer in the Adirondacks. And I am from a big gang. I'm sixth of 7 kids. And it turned out that community, to grow up in a community like that, turned out to be enormously valuable because both my parents kind of died on the young side.
Right.
And there were the 7 of us. And, but we had grown up in such a tight-knit way that literally like walking to school together in the morning, what that's like with your brothers over the years. And so we've remained very close. And, 7 of us are not a bum in the bunch. They're really lovely people. And many of them are married, have kids. The kids are married, their grandkids, all of that stuff. And we still get together multiple times a year, great gangs of us. And we actually had to cancel a family reunion that would have been this summer because of COVID. People just coming from too many different places.
Right.
But I think, I cherish those memories because there was a kind of innocence, and I did walk to school and bike to the place where we went swimming and was, incredibly safe. And,
Yeah.
So good feelings and good memories about that.
The Kiernan name is a wonderful name that still resonates around Albany, and Kiernan Plaza, as I mentioned, across from now, it's now the Sefcu building, which is the old railroad station, the Albany Railroad Station, where North Star Bancorp was for quite some time. But anyway, we could keep this going. I know you've got things to do, I've got things to do, but you're always welcome at the Writers Institute. We're so happy that our founder, William Kennedy, put you on the path to becoming an acclaimed novelist, a best-selling novelist. This is wonderful.
Paul, I guess I would say one footnote to that is that when I went off to Iowa, I had accomplished 1 semester when my father died. Wow. So the last sort of meaningful, so he never got to see me in print. I've had more than 4 million words in print now, 4 million, and I'm at it, with another book coming out in 22. And so the fact, so it ended up like his last feelings about what I was undertaking were affirmative ones. Actually is an immensely valuable thing to me, even now, 32 years after he died, to think about that. And so it's especially kind of touching and important for me to speak with you today because it sort of completes a circle in a way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's its own novelistic arc.
That's wonderful. We appreciate that you were at the Albany Book Festival last year. This will be archived on YouTube channel so people can watch it along with, we're going to be putting up some book festival interviews in a couple weeks, but this will also be on and we'll link to your website. The book is Universe of Two. I would highly recommend it. You can find it at your local independent bookseller, including here in Albany, Bookhouse, Stuyvesant Plaza. And you can also find it online. This has been a wonderful conversation. Stephen Kiernan, author, journalist, and Albanian. Thank you.
A real pleasure to speak with you, Paul. Thanks so very much.
Thanks a lot. Be well.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.